Hello and welcome to the Spinnaker Industries training program on violence and harassment, version 1.0. At Spinnaker, your safety is our top priority. This is our agenda for today. First, we'll review the definitions and legislative requirements pertaining to assault, abuse, and harassment. Next, we'll discuss some exercises involving violence and harassment situations that we must avoid. From there, we'll review the violence and risk assessment, including a safe job procedure on summoning help. We'll review the reports available to report a situation for violence and harassment, and lastly review a summary. Please hold all questions to the end. Definitions and legislative requirements. This is our first video introducing Bill 168.
There is no denying that violence occurs in our workplaces. In the period from April 2008 to March 2009, the Ontario Ministry of Labour received 170 complaints related to workplace violence. In the same time period, Ministry of Labour inspectors made 417 field visits and issued 351 orders related to violence in the workplace. Hi, my name is Kathy Chandler, and I'm an occupational health and safety consultant at Gowling LaFleur Henderson. Under the Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act, employers have a legal imperative to prevent workplace violence. Section 25(2)(h) of the Act states that employers must take every reasonable precaution in the circumstances for the protection of their workers. Bill 168, an act to amend the Occupational Health and Safety Act, will come into force this year on June 15th. Under this new legislation, employers with more than 5 workers will be required to conduct a comprehensive workplace violence risk assessment in consultation with their Joint Health and Safety Committee, their health and safety representative, or their workers. The bill also requires employers to prepare a policy with respect to workplace violence and workplace harassment. One of the ways that I recommend complying with this requirement is opting for an integrated approach to building respect in the workplace by addressing harassment and violence through a respect in the workplace policy. The goal for your respect in the workplace policy should be to educate every worker in acceptable behavior at work. In addition to the risk assessment and policy, employers must take additional proactive steps in order to comply with the requirements of Bill 168 and to prevent violence and harassment in their workplace. These steps include a violence prevention program, due diligence hiring practices, workplace design and engineering controls, workplace practices and procedures, security systems and personnel, worker training and instruction, and finally reviewing and auditing your program.
In the first 10 months following the introduction of Bill 168, the Ministry of Labour received almost 5,000 calls regarding workplace harassment, including sexual harassment. This resulted in over 2,100 harassment complaints, including just about 156 specific to sexual harassment alone. Of the 2,100 complaints, 1,500 field visits were conducted and inspectors issued over 2,100 orders and 35 requirements. Now, a requirement refers to an inspector's authority to request additional information from an employer, typically to obtain documentations and request information in order to determine that the law hasn't been contravened. The Occupational Health and Safety Act, under Section 32(1), states, "The employer shall prepare a policy with respects to violence and harassment and review as often as necessary, but at least annually." Section 32(2), the policy shall be in written form and posted in a conspicuous location. And 32(4), the employer shall reassess the risk of the workplace as often as necessary to ensure that the policy continues to protect workers. Spinnaker has a requirement, and that is a zero-tolerance policy for any person in violation of the violence and harassment policy, including temporary suspension or immediate removal from the workplace. Violence and harassment terms. Assault is a crime of assault, assault and battery, and aggregate of assault, all involve the intentional harm inflicted on one person by another. Any crime involving physical attacks or even the threat of an attack is classified as assault, battery, or both. Abuse is the improper use or treatment of a person, often to unfairly or improperly gain benefit. Abuse comes in many forms, including physical or verbal, assault, rape, unjust practices, crimes, or any other types of aggression. And lastly, harassment. Harassment is the behavior that disrupts or upsets a person and is characteristically repetitive in nature or goes on an ongoing basis. Note, sexual harassment refers to persistent or unwanted sexual advances, typically in the workplace where the consequences of refusing the advancement are potentially disadvantageous to the victim. Let's look at a couple of exercises that talk about violence and harassment. The following pictures show unacceptable cases that violate the company's violence and harassment policy. In this first instance here, you cannot physically harm or give intention of physical harm to a person. Next, you cannot make sexual advancements in the workplace. And lastly, you cannot verbally harm, call stupid, dumb, or scream at a person in a demeaning manner. Additionally, you are not to gossip or spread rumors about other co-workers in the office place. And of course, group fighting is not allowed. Even if you get hit first, do not act, or you may also find yourself in violation of the company policy. Let's look at our second video about workplace violence and harassment.
Everyone should be able to work without fear of workplace violence and harassment in a safe and healthy workplace. Violence and harassment in the workplace are not tolerated in Ontario, and that's why we've brought in legislation to address workplace violence and harassment in Ontario. In the following video, two Ministry of Labour inspectors discuss the requirements in workplace violence and harassment prevention and outline what they'll be looking for during workplace inspections.
I'm Debbie Pavlicek with the Ontario Ministry of Labour. I'm an industrial inspector and healthcare lead.
And I'm Kevin Brown. I'm an occupational health and safety inspector with the Ministry of Labour, and I'm with the construction program.
Workplace violence is the exercise, attempt, or threat of physical force of a person against a worker.
Or it's a statement or behavior that a worker could reasonably interpret to be a threat to exercise physical force that could cause physical injury in the workplace against the worker.
A workplace violence policy and program and a workplace harassment policy and program.
Workplace harassment means engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct against a worker in a workplace that is known or should be known to be unwelcome.
So there are workplaces that have a greater risk for workplace violence.
Some of the conditions that can put a worker at a higher risk would be such things as handling cash, working alone.
Hello, Northeast Nursing Station.
Working with the public, could be working with unstable clients.
Are they on night shift hours? And it also looks like you've identified a lot of your associated risks. Each workplace has specific risks, and that is what is required as well for the workplace violence legislation, is to conduct a risk assessment.
It's important for the employer to do a risk assessment because they'd be able to identify the type of work, the conditions of work, and the nature of work that they do, and the risks that would be associated with their workplace.
Okay, I'm also looking for your health and safety policy in your program. Okay, keep that one over here.
Another requirement would be to ensure workers are reporting incidents of workplace violence and harassment. Also, it requires the employer to investigate these incidents and to deal with them. And also to have a mechanism in place that would summon immediate assistance in case of a workplace violence act or a potential for one.
We have an emergency buzzer system, plus we have a code white call, which is...
It's important for the employer to have a policy, a program for both workplace violence and workplace harassment, and also develop training and deliver that training to their workers on their own procedures and their own policies.
When it comes to a workplace, I generally am speaking to the workplace parties about policies that they have in place. They may have a manual on many of the measures and procedures that are part of their program. And then also I'm looking at training documents in terms of instructions, if they have any instruction of workers on the policy and programs available.
I'm Kevin Brown. I'm a construction inspector with the Ministry of Labour, and I'm here to do an inspection on your job site.
When we arrive on site, we're initially looking to speak to the supervisor of the projects and also to the worker health and safety rep or joint health and safety committee members that are there. During a routine inspection, we'll also be looking for a policy and a program in relationship to harassment. And we want to see the employer has done those things and has one of those functioning in their workplace.
As well, the employer has a requirement to investigate those incidents and then deal with them.
In the event of workplace violence, the Ministry of Labour is not the first responders. In any case of violence or attempted physical force or threat of violence in the workplace, it's still the role of the police to investigate and to deal with those incidents.
You are aware that workers can refuse to work if they have reason to believe that they will be physically injured by workplace violence.
Nobody should expect workplace violence to be part of their normal job.
Workplace violence is not tolerated in any workplace.
People should be able to go to work in Ontario without fear of workplace violence or harassment.
Violence and risk assessment. The Violence and Risk Assessment Questionnaire is reviewed annually by your Joint Health and Safety Committee. It is designed to assess each workplace for its susceptibility to violence and harassment and to develop risk mitigation strategy preventions for control. The questionnaire provides examples of controls. Your goal is to determine if existing controls are adequate and if not, provide recommendations. The Spinnaker Industries assessment result identify the following action. Number 1, develop a procedure for front office receptionists. Number 2, workers are not permitted to work alone. And number 3, develop a procedure for warehouse workers to deal with strangers or intruders. This is the procedure that was developed by your Joint Health and Safety Committee for warehouse workers to summon help. This will be reviewed on your next regular toolbox talk. But let's talk about this. Step 1, review the violence and risk assessment and summon help procedure prior to work. Step 2, if you encounter a violent person or member in violation of the violence and harassment policy, remove yourself from the situation. Do not engage, assault, or threaten abuse against the worker because you may also find yourself culpable in this action. Step 3, report the incident to your immediate supervisor. If you are unable to report the incident to your immediate supervisor, confine yourself in your supervisor's office and lock the door. Step 4, using the office phone and extension list or your cell phone, call the supervisor and inform them of the situation. Additionally, if you're unable to contact the supervisor, contact a member of senior management or call the police. The warehouse supervisor's extension includes 138, 137, and 135. For senior management, you can refer to Adam Latanzio at extension 132 or Andrew Latanzio at 125. Report incidents of violence and harassment. Spinnaker Industries provides incident reporting forms for any kind of violence and harassments that take place at the workplace. They include an incident report form, a witness statement, and an investigation form. Let's review this a little bit closely. The incident report form must be completed by the respondent. Their goal is to complete the titles, the respondent's information, identify what happened, including any kind of comments. Step 4, you want to sign off and review with your supervisor. All parties must sign off on the incident report form. It's also important to note that reporting a false claim of violence and harassment is a serious matter. All false reports will be dealt with harsh consequences. Additionally, Spinnaker has a zero-tolerance policy for violence and harassment, including either temporary suspension or permanent removal from the workplace. The next form is to be filled out by the investigator. They will complete their titles, incorporate all parties' information, identify what happened, including sketches, descriptions, timelines, and pictures. They may also attach witness statements, sign off, and send all this information for senior management to perform an investigation. The outcome. During an investigation, both parties may be sent home. This is done to prevent favoritism and to enhance the integrity of the investigation. This is also up to the discretion of the investigator and or the supervisor. Spinnaker has a zero-tolerance policy for violence and harassment at the workplace. Anyone caught in violation may be temporarily suspended and or permanently removed from the workplace. In summary, this is our last video that's just going to go through an overview of the violence and harassment policy.
It seems like everyone is talking about bullying and harassment. But what does it mean for you and your workplace? This video explains what workplace bullying and harassment is and what it's not. Legal obligations for employers, supervisors, and workers. And where to get the information you need. So first off, what is workplace bullying and harassment? It includes any inappropriate conduct or comment by a person towards a worker that the person knew or reasonably ought to have known would cause that worker to be humiliated or intimidated. Examples could be yelling or name-calling, vandalizing personal belongings, harmful hazing or initiation practices. There might be a single perpetrator or a group. There may be just one target or many. Bullying and harassment can occur between co-workers or between the employer and a worker. Or it can come from external sources, such as members of the public, clients and customers, or workers from other organizations. Bullying and harassment also extends to online activities. Cyberbullying can occur through email, text messages, social networks, and other websites. What is not considered workplace bullying and harassment? Managers and supervisors have many responsibilities. Decisions relating to job duties, workloads, deadlines, and performance management, or the direction of workers and the workplace are not bullying and harassment. So what are your legal duties? Employers have an obligation to take reasonable steps to prevent bullying and harassment, or minimize it where possible. Employers must also develop a policy statement that addresses bullying and harassment in the workplace. Develop and implement procedures for reporting incidents or complaints, and for how they will be dealt with. They also have to train supervisors and workers. Supervisors and workers are required to comply with the employer's policies and procedures and not engage in workplace bullying and harassment. Workers must report it when they see it or experience it. The bottom line is, bullying and harassment is a workplace hazard that poses a risk to the health and safety of workers. As part of their responsibility to protect workers' safety, WorkSafe BC prevention officers will inspect workplaces to determine if employers have taken reasonable steps to prevent and address bullying and harassment. The occupational health and safety policies explain what WorkSafe BC considers to be reasonable steps for employers to take. When bullying is reported, it gives employers an opportunity to take positive action. Put an end to workplace bullying and harassment.
Test time. If you have any questions about this or any other training program, please contact a member of the Bellator group or your health and safety rep. Thank you and have a great day.